AI happens pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, it might just pass you by.
Hello, and welcome to The Reasoning Show. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, and today I have reason to believe that we may need to put out, and I don't want to be overly boisterous about this or trying to scare anybody, but I think we may have to put out a code red because there is a lot of stuff bubbling kind of under the surface that if you are not sort of adopting a pattern of work that makes AI the center of what you're doing, it not as an augmented tool, not as a nice thing to have, but sort of the center of what you're doing, I think we're going to find there is going to be a 5x to 10x difference between that type of work that you do where AI is an augmented thing versus AI, sort of an AI-centric thing. And we're going to dig into that right after the break. Today's show is brought to you by VENTION. Is AI truly improving how your software gets built or just adding complexity? At VENTION, AI isn't an add-on. It's embedded into their software development lifecycle from architecture and coding through testing and release. Their engineers use it to cut friction, speed up progress, and raise quality at every stage. That's what they call the peace of mind promise. You focus on growing the product and winning your market while they handle the tech. Get software developers who build with you, not just for you, at VentionTeams.com. And we're back, and I'm going to kind of call this, as we used to do back on the Cloudcast show, sort of a weekend perspective. And I'm actually recording this one a little bit late on Sunday, so I apologize for any of you who like to get the show on Sunday morning. This was an interesting week. I'm not sure exactly how this show is going to go. This might turn out to be a terribly dumb show. I'll look back on it and go, what were you thinking? Why didn't you realize these things more quickly? But I'm sort of calling this show Code Red. And the reason for that is I spent the last, week and a half. I didn't necessarily intend to do it on purpose, but I ended up speaking with a lot of different people, colleagues of mine, people I know in the industry, reading a number of things. And as you know, if you followed the show for any period of time, Aaron and I have been, covering this space for 3+ years, really kind of since the beginning of ChatGPT and sort of the launch of generative AI as a whole, at least the mainstream version of that. And I think we've tried to follow along with it. We've sort of seen how every year, whatever is sort of hot for the year tends to get eclipsed in 3 months to 6 months, and then we sort of forget about it. I think we've, like many people, have sort of been going through the sort of mental rationalization of is this going to be something that is augmentative to most people, whether you are in knowledge work or you're in research or other types of things, or is this something that people are going to look at from the perspective of it's sort of replacement type of technology for whatever the task might be that you think would be better served by the AIs doing things however they do them, faster, cheaper, more efficient, more robust, whatever it might be. And I spent a lot of time this past week really just talking to people about how they were using it, and people who had been using it for reasonable periods of time. And by reasonable periods of time, it could be anywhere from they've been doing it for a year or 6 months to they just picked it up over the last couple of weeks and really just sort of dedicated an entire period of time to some aspect of the technology. And in most cases, that aspect of the technology was, things that had to do with agents or some sort of personal productivity or AI assistant. And what really jumped out at me was just the sheer level of difference between people who were sort of casually using it, sort of people that were, for the most part, have been using AI and generative AI in the, not assistant, but augmentation. They've been using it as, help me build something, help me write something, write some code for me, some amount of sort of Googling, searching types of things, versus this new sort of category of people that I've really been kind of digging into with, who have been using it very much with the intention of, how do I use it as much as possible? And what are the force multipliers that I can go about doing with this? And so there was a category of people that I talked to that were sort of living that thing. And what was interesting to me in talking to them, again, played with a number of the tools, but maybe not necessarily sort of dedicating enormous amounts of time to making it kind of the starting point of everything I do, was just sort of amazing how much, in talking to them as they were talking to their colleagues and so forth, how much of a gap there is between people who really haven't experiment with this at all, whether these are development teams or these are colleagues and coworkers. So, sort of the difference between the person who was sort of at zero of I used it and it did something, and they sort of said, it's fine, it doesn't do anything for me. So let's call that zero, to the person who uses it occasionally and is trying to figure it out, but really isn't dedicating any time. Let's sort of call that one, on the step chart, if you will. And then just talking to people who are, again, basically said, this will be the center of how I do work. And those folks, again, it didn't matter if they'd been doing it for 2 weeks or if they've been doing it for 4 or 5 months or 6 months or a year and a half. Like those folks were 8 or 9 on the scale. And what really jumped out at me, again, is whether or not you are using it to write software, whether you're using it to augment knowledge work or some other types of thing, the amount of gap between the people that dabble and the people that make it the center of what they do is not trivial. It's not like a 2x type of thing. It's not a X type of thing. I mean, it is a multiple orders of magnitude, how much more they're getting done or how much better they're getting done, how much time they're able to take away from sort of tasks that are just repetitive, but they want to get out of the way, but also being able to really use it as a kind of an amazing, pair, if you will, whether you're a pair programmer or, pair to your job or whatever that thing might be. And so that to me, again, in talking to all these folks and maybe not necessarily realizing that the gap that had happened between the 0 and 1 users and the sort of dedicated users who are now living at 6, 7, 8, 9 in terms of sort of velocity of their scale was a complete eye opener for me. So March of 2026. And again, had seen plenty of people do some things and seen some interesting projects and so forth. Yeah. So, and it really kind of got me thinking. It got me thinking about sort of where this velocity will be incredibly powerful and incredibly useful, but also what it's going to, the pressure it's going to put on companies, on their IT organizations and IT staffs and so forth because of what's going to kind of come out of this. And so the 3 sort of velocities that immediately jumped out for me, the first one is the realization that all of this stuff, we've been having these conversations and we've talked about like coding assistants and so on and so forth. I think the way to sort of think about this and the way that I'm now thinking about this is really every job is code, right? And what I mean by that is your job may not be software developer. Your job may not be dev test engineer. It may not be software architect, but every aspect of what you do, if you are in the knowledge work business, or even, there are going to be other businesses, whether you are running a business or something along those lines, in which the more you can think about the work that you're doing as software, and that may take some learning, and we may need to do some shows about how to think about that. The further along you will get on that sort of 0 to 10 sort of step scale. I think we allowed ourselves to sort of think about, okay, these tools are great for coding assistants, a Claude Code, a Codex, a Copilot, or whatever that might be. I think what's really interesting is the people that are realizing that it is software and they don't think about software as their job, but they, as their primary job of like writing software, but they realize that in a digital world, they are sort of right in the middle of software, whether that is interacting with data, interacting with APIs, writing some software to be able to go off and do tasks that, you wouldn't think of as a traditional application, but ultimately can be software, the way that it interacts with the systems that you work with every single day. I think that's a really important and big shift that will happen. And maybe many people already understood that. For me, it's sort of like this, don't think about software developers as their own thing. Think about everybody as the middle of interacting with software. The second thing, obviously, that's going to lead to a set of productivity. I think the other thing that became really interesting as I was thinking about this was, and I was talking to somebody about like new hires and companies hiring and people fearing for their jobs of, is AI replacing all these things? And I think there is a huge opportunity for people talk about, it's really hard for junior developers to do this. And I think there's a huge opportunity for smart businesses who may look out at the marketplace and they go, we really need to begin to use AI better. We're looking at some of our competition and it feels like they are AI first. They are building software and hence features and hence market, building ways to get into market, ways to differentiate in market, ways to capture customers, whatever that thing might be, at a rate that just feels far faster than it was before. And again, probably because either they are taking a startup mentality, they are adopting software faster, a sort of AI-driven software faster. And it really kind of got me thinking that, we're having this weird conversation where people are like, should this stuff replace developers? And there's, there's going to be headlines coming out of like such and such a company laid off all these people because they're doing all this stuff with AI. And I think what is going to be a really interesting way of thinking about this is if you were to pair up even a junior software developer, even if these are for periods of time, right? If you were to hire a junior software developer into every line of business that you have, or with every manager that you have, and even if it was for periods of time or you rotated them through the business, there is going to be this huge gap between people who think in business terms. So maybe they live in spreadsheets, maybe they live in marketing concepts or strategy concepts, maybe they are sales managers, whatever they might be. They run the supply chain and they think in terms of sort of the systems that they work in, but they never think of like themselves as building software or doing integrations. They think in terms of like, okay, how would I make A connect to B, and how would I go after C as a target market, and how would I access D sets of data to do whatever? But they don't really know how to do that. And so, in the past, this was sort of set up as like, okay, well, there's going to be some way that you're going to make a request into the team that does systems and blah, blah, blah. And I think the opportunity to start bringing even junior developers, even if they're on a rotational basis, to really sit with the lines of business, just in the same way that, and people may not necessarily understand this analogy, but when I was growing up around the automotive industry, there were constantly consultants who would come into the factory floors, and they would sit with some group that was building something, that were looking at the process of how long something took, or how inefficient or more efficient it could be made. And those folks were not automotive experts. They weren't engineers by trade. They were kind of efficiency consultants, right? They had the ability to go, okay, you're going to speak to me in your language, in your concepts, in your words, in your environment, and I'm going to be able to translate that into things that we can then look at and go, okay, why does this process take 5 steps? And why do we have the materials for that process way over here, 60 feet away, that require a truck to bring a bunch of brake pads over so that we can install them? Why don't we move things closer, reduce 5 steps to 3 steps, move some people around so that they're not reaching as far and hence, messing up their back and then having claims and, being out of work. And all these things were things that, again, companies used to do, and they used to sort of pair the people doing the work with people that were, had a different set of skills, but combining those two things together ended up creating better process, more efficiency, new ideas for how to better do things and so forth. And I feel like you're going to have a lot of really smart business people who are going to look at, or they're going to read stories about, hey, somebody figured this stuff out. And yeah, if you had 2 weeks of free time, you could figure out Claude Code and Claude Skills and, co-work and automation and all these sorts of things. But they're not necessarily going to have that time. And so what they're going to want is they're going to want someone to get them started in these things, whether that's for their own team or whether it's sort of a collective thing across multiple teams. I feel like there's going to be a huge opportunity for that combination of devs working directly in the business, rewiring the concept of business analyst, rewiring the concept of product manager or product marketer, and really embedding them with people that know software, but you're trying to bridge the gap between business and software. And I think Brandon Witchard over at Software Defined Talk, who most of you know, he comes on the show quite a bit, was talking about it on their show this past week. They did an entire show on just sort of their embracing of the religion of Claude Code. And he said, this feels like the very first time in which there was so little space between this new technology that could do something and your ability to translate that into something that would become business productive, right? Or efficiency productive. He said that he felt like that was the smallest gap we've ever seen between that, between, hey, here's this new cool thing, and like, how do I go about using it? And I couldn't agree with that more. That jumped out at me and it resonated with me. But I think smart businesses are going to figure out a way to realize that if they could augment all the ideas that people have, right? All the ideas that business people have, and working with their markets and working with their products and working with their customers or whatever they end up doing, if they had the ability to get that turned into digital, into software, into capabilities, into systems faster, as opposed to waiting for the normal process they go through, whatever that might be, through a consultant, through a third party, through whatever, those kind of companies, especially sort of legacy companies or medium and larger companies, are going to start seeing the ability to turn that into some of these 2x, 3x, 5x productivity gains that they're going to watch their competition do that are more AI native types of companies. And so I think there's there's a huge opportunity for bringing those two sets of dynamics and skills together. And it would be not huge investment, but it would be very strategic investment that I think you could start to say, okay, this is beneficial, as opposed to getting into the sort of nonsense of like, should we be firing our developers? Are our developers productive enough and so forth? I would look at it as if you're finding that your developers with AI tools have become more productive than you expected them to be, instead of thinking about how do I downsize them or have 30% or 50% less, put them over with the business group and start giving the business group the superpower of now having usable, tangible things that can turn things into digital and software really quick. I think the other couple things that, for this audience that's going to relate to really quickly. And again, I think we're going to see this year, we're into March, but we're already seeing more and more sort of stories like this bubble to the surface. And I think we're going to see them take off throughout the year. There's going to be a couple of things that are going to become incredibly powerful, but necessary within IT organizations and sort of AI platform organizations or AI ops organizations, whatever you end up calling them within your organization. The first one is going to be people that are helping you put together sort of agent ops, the types of things that are going to help you make sure that these agents have a certain amount of red teaming put against them, so they act the way that you expect them to act, or whatever personality you're supposed to act with, that they've got proper identity, that you can secure how they communicate, whether it's between agents or to external systems like MCP servers or AI gateways or whatever that might be. Having a team in place that can onboard them in a reasonable way, be able to figure out how are they being identified, what's the scope of what they're supposed to do, so that people understand where should I potentially put guardrails or just let them run and go fast. They are going to create scale and demand on your AI systems more than you've ever seen. In fact, I think we're going to start to see, while the majority of probably, I think I saw somewhere like 65 to 70% of most AI stuff happens out in the cloud. We've got 25, 30%. I think we're going to start to see some very interesting stories about token economics and token factories and companies who are saying, hey, it was one thing when we were using our GPUs to sort of train or modify models that the data science team were doing, and we were rolling out the first couple of chatbots and customer service assistants. When you start allowing individual lines of business, individual users to have sort of swarms of agents or multiple agents, and those agents are able to work many hours a day at a task, interacting with each other, reasoning about things, trying to figure out better, efficient ways to do stuff. Inferencing, the demands on your inferencing, whether it's for performance or scale or whatever it might be, are going to go through the roof. Just ask anybody who has a Claude Code account, how quickly they went from free tier to $20 tier to $200 tier to $300 tier, and how they're talking about, just as an individual, how they'll max out the $300 tier if they were doing it for their regular job, and how people are thinking about, gosh, how do I ask it another question, but I don't want to waste it on useless tokens. You multiply that by hundreds of people or thousands of people in your organization, and the need for figuring out some very, very smart ways and efficient ways to do inference, whether it's better inference, so better use of GPUs, more efficient models, a mix of really smart frontier models with smaller models to be able to offload tasks and figure that stuff out. Like those two couple of roles, whether it's around agent ops or whether it's around, I'll just call it inference ops, just to keep the terminology simple, are going to be really, really important. And I think as more and more individuals, leaders in your organization, people that are looking to move up their, up the chain, people that are looking to make a difference in your business, they're going to get smart. They're going to spend a week. They're going to spend 2 weeks. And again, that couple of weeks they spend, and then the habits of that form is going to, again, take them from that 0, 1, or 2 in terms of usefulness with AI to a 7, 8, or 9, like really fast, very, very fast. And the number of people I've seen who are doing that, and again, we're not talking about like, oh, these are genius off the charts. These are just people that are like, I spent some time, I learned the tools, I've been sort of following some stuff. It's going to explode. And to me, I don't want to call it a code red because it's, some terrible red flag, but I think there is something bubbling under the surface, and it's multiplied in the last 6 months with some of these advancements around agents and some of the skills and some of the frameworks around this, that I think if you're not paying attention to it, you are going to realize that this is not going to be 6 months you got behind, but what's going to feel like the equivalent of 2 or 3 years that you got behind. People that are, heads down, dedicated to doing this and making it part of everything they do, not just augmented to what they do. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing for us to figure out how to measure in terms of companies that are all in, people that are all in on the tool, because like I said, the gap between them is going to be so big and it's going to become so apparent very, very quickly. I mean, I'm not trying to hype this like Dario or anybody like that, but just, again, from talking to lots of just regular people over the last 7, 8, 10 days, it has become just one of those moments for me. And I think I've got the advantage of having seen a lot of technology trends, and this one is very, very eye-opening. Anyways, with that, I'll wrap it up. Sort of weekend perspective. Like I said, I wasn't exactly sure where I was going to go with it, but I kind of wanted to get some perspective out there from some experience I'd seen. Happy to chat with anybody about things in this space, but I've been very, very impressed by how this is moving along. So if anybody's got feedback or they've got good stories to tell around this, would love to hear them. show@reasoning.show. You can hit us up at that email address or hit us up on any of the social media stuff that you'll see in the footnotes and speaker notes for this. So with that, thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Check us out online at reasoning.show for all things reasoning, and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to the show.